before you. Yeah, yeah. Let me. Yeah, I never. Yeah, I don't know what. Okay, metaphysics. Okay, hold on. Okay, sorry, y'all. I'm taking notes too. Metaphysics, which I doubt will occur anytime soon. They can't use Descartes' trademark arguments either, nor can they use his vastly inferior version of the ontological arguments, of course. I'm not sure they can even use the Kalam cosmological arguments, since that argument sets up a cause beyond time as well. The only argument I can see open theists using is the argument from desire. Yep. Which Greg Boyd particularly liked Boyd 2015. However, that argument doesn't work for them in the first place, since it stresses a transcendent reality and the demiurge is anything but that. That argument is weak anyway, and any argument similar to it, like the mortal argument and transcendental argument, won't work for them either. Supposing the open theists can prove the existence of their demiurge, I also see no way how they set up any of the divine attributes. They especially can't jump from the demiurge existence to Christianity. There's an old atheist joke that God is just a beard sky fairy. While that clearly is a straw man to classical theists, open theists have to bite the bullet and accept it. So even when, oh, okay. So let me continue and then I'll break it down just because this is getting good. So consequently, most neckbeard, let me go back up. They must bite the bullet and accept it. Consequently, most neckbeard tires atheist question thrown at theists should stump the open theists, including but not limited to the following: who created the demiurge? How do you know your demiurge is the true demiurge? Why a demiurge and not some alien? Can the demiurge lie? Does the demiurge determine morality, attributally, something like that? Y'all, excuse me. Or does morality exist beyond the demiurge? On experience, now on to the final portion of the Westland quadrilateral. This section needs little discussion, but it matters nonetheless. Reason, scripture, tradition, experience. How does it feel to think of a protector who cannot distinguish real worlds and possible worlds? Good question. That's a good question. That is a very good question. I can't imagine praying at night to a deity who can't even promise to fulfill prophecy that were given in the infallible testimony of this deity apparent perfection. Isn't it awfully ironic that the folks who encourage this kind of ontology are often those who suggest that the gift of prophecy continues to this very day? Seriously, though, it just seems silly to believe in such an incompetent deity. I don't remember having a prayer answered with something like, I'll try. Conclusion. Open theism parades a philosophy that embarrasses theists all around. I cannot imagine any classical philosopher or theologian, for that matter, taking any of these ideas seriously. I pray to God that he purges this erroneous belief from the church for all eternity. Yeah, take out the trash. If this belief became the norm, Christianity will literally fall apart. That's true. That's true. Get your trifling behind out of my doggone chat. Why are you here? Nobody cares what you think. Bye. We're dealing with something serious here. Go find you something to do. Um, wow. And go back to that question, Brother Brian. Scroll back up because he asked a very good question here. It's in this right here. How does it, now, family, listen to this. How does it feel to think of a protector who cannot distinguish real worlds and possible worlds? So I guess you can only answer that personally for yourself. But this is a very awesome question that the author of this particular article just asked. How would you feel? I'm going to reword some things. How would you feel? How would I feel? How would Brother Brian feel? Or Pastor Sean? Maybe they can answer as well. To think of a protector, which would be God, who cannot distinguish. Distinguish means to tell the difference between real world and the possible world. God don't know the difference. So how can he protect you if he don't know the difference? Brother Brian, Pastor Sean, y'all care to try to tackle that? Because that would scare the heck out of me. Then that means God ain't God. Right? They already denying who God is. Brother Brian, you want to try to tackle this question? Because this is a
I mean, it's going to boil down to is God perfect, and then does he know everything, or hey, does he decide he got a backup plan, or that's what I'm saying, man. I hate to know that we're being run by this whole earth is run by somebody that might do something and might not do something. I mean, that is kind of silly. I don't understand the whole point in it. I mean, just because you don't, my thing is just because you don't like Calvinism, look, man, it don't make sense.
Yeah, it actually it's an all out attack directed towards Calvinism alone. But what end up happening, family, is that open theists, they have gone too far. They have literally just canceled out God. And notice what the author does this entire time, pretty much. He's separating their God from the God that we worship. You notice that, Brother Brian? He calls their God a demiurge, right?
That's what he is, because
That's
he
what
can't run the earth. He has to be inside time to control what man. I mean, you can't tell me that you look at Jesus' birth and his baptism and his death wasn't everything was designed perfect, or it wouldn't have worked. That guy over there said that he didn't have to do that. He decided to do that. And then they were asking Mike questions about, well, could Jesus do his own will? I'm thinking he did the Father's will. That was the whole purpose in Jesus coming. And that joker over there talking about, well, Jesus could have sinned, and I'm like, what? But a lot of that, whatever that guy's name is, no, the other guy that was on y'all's platform last night.
Thunder.
There he is. He was the main one that was spewing that silliness.
And this right here, this God that they're worshiping needs us. He's not this thing that they're worshiping. It's not dependent. It doesn't know all things. It's limited. In fact, it's imperfect. It's imperfect. There's no perfection. Now, according to the biblical text, God, Yahweh, Elohim, we know him. He's perfect in every way. He knows all things, right? But this thing that these people are worshiping, and I guess since the author made a distinguish between the two, I might as well go ahead and do the same thing, because he done laid out enough evidence to do that. Obviously, this thing, it can it hold its promise? What is it making its promises based off on? It needs us to complete it. If that's the case, then it's not God. It's not God at all. So that's a problem right here. And open theism, when it comes down to the biblical text, it ain't talking about the God that we worship. This thing is talking about something else. It's flawed. Then how can it set the standard? And then I think in this article, let me go back. Does this thing lie? Does it lie? It might does. Does it break its promise? If you get in trouble, does it know what to do? According to open theism, it has to learn. It has to learn what to do. But in the biblical text, God already knows what to do. And he tells you what to do. You know, oh my God. Oh boy. Oh my goodness. And if we had rolled with this, if let's say all 2.4 billion Christians rolls with this type of garbage, you might as well just close your Bibles and walk away from it. Because there's another error here, an area that this thing affects. Yeah. I'm going to show you real quick. Brother Brian, can you take down your screen share real quick? Because I want to show them something. I want to show them something. Let me see. Okay, give me a second. Maybe I can do it like this. All right. Okay, thank you, Brother Brian. Let me bring this up here. Let me bring this up here first. Y'all give me a second. And I was looking at this, and this thing here, it was just awesome. Saddening, but brought some clarity. So I was wondering, would this thing walk you into something else, right? And I was surfing and looking, and unfortunately, I was correct. So let me bring this lady up here. This young lady here, which I'm about to show you, and then I'm gonna get to Pastor Sean's article. This young lady here that you're about to see, well, I'm gonna just let you see it for yourself. Here you go.
Hey all you cool cats and kittens, this is Lauren from Big Atheist Rescue. Hey everyone, this is Lauren. Welcome to Skeptic She, or welcome back. Before we jump into the topic of the day, I would like to mention some good and bad news. We are moving to a nicer neighborhood, which means I will no longer be living in this apartment and receiving Scientology magazines accidentally. I did post a poll on Twitter asking you all. With that, today we are going to be reading off another one of my blog posts. As always, there's a link to this blog post in the description if you would like to follow along, or if you would like to take a look at some additional sources and links. With no further ado, let's get started. If you've ever believed in a personal God, specifically the Christian one, at some point you may have thought about the nature of God's mind. If he is omniscient or all-knowing, can he ever change his mind? If he can, does that mean he is subject to outside influence and may not be omnipotent or all-powerful? If he cannot change his mind, does that also call his omnipotence into question? Do people even have free will? Does he?
Disclaimer, I personally think free will is an illusion, but we are talking about theists here, not me.
If God cannot change his mind, then what's the point of prayers of petition or asking God for something other than to show him trust. For that matter, why would anyone need to show that they trust him if he already knows whether or not they do? Well, there's one interesting doctrine that attempts to answer these questions and tries to reconcile God's omniscience and omnipotence with the free will of humans. It's called open theism, otherwise known as openness theology or free will theism. It's messy to say the least, but I did consider myself an open theist for a short time, and I found the doctrine pretty refreshing. According to pastor and author Greg Boyd, who is also a very popular open theist, open theism is this.
In a nutshell, I usually describe it as simply the belief that possibilities are real. It really comes down to that. Possibilities are real. And that God, who is omniscient, knows all things, knows possibilities is real. Just like he knows that an elephant is an elephant and a monkey is a monkey and an actuality is an actuality, he knows a possibility is a possibility.
To elaborate on this, it's the belief that because God created the world out of love, he created it with possibilities, giving humans the ability to freely make any of a virtually infinite number of choices. He does not always know what the outcomes will be, but he does know that a variety of possibilities exist. I've heard a couple of open theists explain this slightly differently, saying that God could know all outcomes if he wanted to, but he chooses not to. He can thus respond to and be moved by his creation, making his relationship to humans more intimate and mutual. It's a nice thought, really. I certainly thought so in the short time that I followed this doctrine, but as you can imagine, it's pretty controversial among many Christians, as Boyd touches on here.
It conflicts with the classical view, which held that when God created the world, and actually before God created the world, from all eternity, all facts were settled. So every fact of world history was resolved before the world was ever created, from all eternity. And then the classical view would debate whether God resolved it by willing it, and that's the more Calvinist perspective, or whether God simply knew it was resolved, and that's the more Arminian perspective. But either way, all facts are resolved. Open theists simply believe that when God created the world, he created it with possibilities, unresolved possibilities. And to the degree that the world consists of unresolved possibilities, then the fact that God knows is that it may go this way or that way. God created a world in which the future is to some degree open.
Now, of course, as an atheist and secular humanist, I don't disagree that our existence is full of unresolved possibilities, and I have no problem with this. This is reality. The difference between Greg Boyd and me is that I don't think there's a supernatural creator behind those possibilities. But for Christianity, open theism causes a lot of problems, and frankly, it only gives me more reason to be an atheist. But we'll expand on that in a bit. First, here's why Boyd and other open theists find...
So let me pause her for 2 seconds. This thing walked her straight into atheism. And that was on my mind too. Based off on what I heard before I even, searched out or anything. And I know some of y'all like, oh, this don't help. No, actually, yeah, it lets you know that this doctrine is a problem, because it just walked this young lady straight into atheism. She doesn't even believe that there is a God, period. Right? Now I want you to hear what else she says. And some things are going to be may be offensive to you. But I read what Sister Donna put in the chat. She says, the devil doesn't even hide his hand anymore. The answer to that question, if it's a question or that statement, you're right. He ain't hiding his hand no more. This is all out, blatant, just downright denial and disrespect of God. It is a hairline away from just not believing God at all. So I don't disagree with that statement. But this is an atheist. Yeah, she's an atheist. And she was under the doctrine of open theism, Rick C. Which is crazy to me. But you know what? When I was reading up on it and researching this, I said, and then the first thought that came into my mind, I said, this will walk somebody into atheism. I wonder if that's true. She's living proof of that. She is living proof of that. even with all the bending and bringing God down and, philosophical explaining and all that mumbo jumbo, you know what I'm talking about. It literally walked her into atheism. Now I want you to listen to what else she says, because it gets even more wild, right? Then I'm gonna show you something else, and then I'm gonna go to Pastor Sean's article here. Here we go.
And the doctrine to be especially valid and beneficial to contemporary believers.
Up to this point, the world has been much more conducive to a deterministic view than an open view. Now, however, everything's changing. We are in a new day. Science is much more open to openness stuff. The categories of science are not the rigid ones that we got from the Newtonian worldview. So the ultimate gestalt of the world, at least the Western world, is changing in a way that I think is actually much more conducive to the biblical worldview than the deterministic view ever was.
On that last point, yes, there are certainly examples of God changing his mind in the Bible, but there are also plenty of claims that God never changes his mind. So 1 point for open theism, another point for the classical perspective. It's yet another case of the Bible contradicting itself, being the antiquated, cobbled together mess that it is, and I don't feel the need to expand on which view is more biblical. But moving on, let's dig into why open theism is quite damning to Christianity and theistic beliefs in general. First, as it kind of came off to me in that last clip, Boyd is admitting in so many words that if Christians don't embrace this openness stuff and progress with society and science, then they are on the wrong side of history. Like many progressive Christians, open theists apparently try to prevent this embarrassment. The difference is that open theists try to do so by claiming that God can and does change his mind, and he wants humans to do it with him and for him. Now, as far as progressive Christianity in more common terms, believers are willing to change with the times while still believing that God is unchanging and that he foreknows how society will change. Free will exists, but God knows what people will do with it. It's cognitive dissonance however you spin it, so no one really wins here. In any case, here's what I think is the biggest piece of bad news for open theists. Their doctrine is arguably a slippery slope towards blatantly admitting that humans invented God. Of course, I would argue that pretty much all theologies reveal this fact to some degree, but open theism does it in an especially overt way. Whatever happens for the benefit of an open theist, i.e. an affirmatively answered prayer, often happens because they influenced God's will to make it so. Now, I suppose this isn't really any...
So when you pray to God, according to open theism, your prayer influences God. Right? Then she said, the perspective of open theism, because of the way it's fashioned, you basically made God up according to your reaction. Or your action, your reaction, your action, however you want to say it. Open theism, sure enough, opened her up to straight up atheism. Now we know, according to the biblical text, this garbage is way off. But I'm showing you reality. This is what false doctrine does. It leads a person away, directing them away from God. And what I'm discovering is that open theism is closer to atheism than you can imagine. It's a hairline fracture away, or a hairline fracture away. Pretty much you're worshiping something else. If you're going to stay in the theological realm, you're pretty much worshiping something else that is limited, that really ain't God. On the other perspective, from where she's coming from, by the information she's presenting, God is just created by man. Now, yes, that is an atheist perspective, but because that God has to move based off on our actions, he can't move on his own. He needs us to counteract or to make his next move, which is totally ridiculous. Right? Let's hear what else she has to say. Just hear it out. Here we go.
worse than the deterministic view, in which believers can justify virtually anything after it happens, good or bad, by claiming it was God's will. But still, open theists have the audacity to essentially claim some power over God. They wouldn't put it that way, of course, but how else would you describe what Boyd says next?
The open view encourages people to really take responsibility for your life. Whether you pray or not, things really hang on it. The future is not in any sense pre-settled. That we are really co-creators with God. Now I want to be careful. I'm not saying that we're little gods or something like that, but God really empowers us to partner with Him to bring about the creation that He wants. Our choices really make a difference. There are things that really are at stake in what we do. You're important to the kingdom, and so God needs you to stand up and live passionately and give it all you got and get in the kingdom, get in the game, and do what you're called to do.
Okay, so Greg Boyd is claiming to be co-creators with God, saying that God needs believers, and he has to clarify that he's not saying we're little gods, which is actually exactly what he's saying. That certainly sounds like a slippery slope to me, and I'm a little surprised that I didn't think so while I was Christian. As one article from an
So open theism makes you a little god. I listen, I don't believe in this foolishness. So y'all better not hang me. I'm studying right along with you. I'm researching right along with you. We're co-creators with God. When the Bible clearly in Job, and I want to say in Proverbs, God asked a question. Who was with me when I did this? Where were you when I did that? Where was you at when this went on? Right? Speaking about in the beginning, right? Before man was formed, nowhere. So how can open theism even begin to give this thought? This is a problem, ladies and gentlemen. A very big problem. So now we are little gods now? So now we can control God himself? Really? Our prayers, if we do pray according to open theism, it influences God. Or you don't need to pray at all because basically the future ain't in God's hands. Pretty much nothing is in God's hands at this point. It's all in your hand according to your actions and your reactions, right? Interesting. And if open theism is just so great, with it lowering God so much, why this young lady walked into atheism? Because all the rules are bent. A little bit above God, because that's exactly what it's doing. Why did it walk her directly into atheism? I just got questions. All right, it's almost done.
Ontario Church says, open theism fashions a God much closer to Adam than Jesus. Further digging this hole, Greg Boyd does some circular reasoning on his website to try and keep open theism on solid ground, saying, contrary to what critics of open theism claim, open theists affirm that God always knows everything perfectly. It's just that we have reason to believe a partly open future is part of what God perfectly knows. Tricky, right? For one thing, doesn't God exist outside of time and therefore can't have a future per se, let alone an open one? This gets really complicated really fast, and we're left with an abundance of question begging. Now, to be fair, I'm not a Christian anymore, and I really don't have a problem with open theism. After all, I don't really have a stake in trying to get to know the nature of a being I don't think exists. Also, I concept, let alone that there are countless denominations within the gaps. He allows division to be sown among us rather than making it easy